Welcome to Tom Fellrath's FANzine Live, and I am Steve Willis, the author of this book, Dog of Dawn, Dog of Dusk. I've been producing my own comics since 1973. The very first one was on a mimeograph in a mobile home in a farm near McClary, Washington, where I was raised, and I continue to live right now, although I have lived in other parts of the world. The character here on the cover is my main character. I hang my hat on, Morty the dog, or maybe I should say he hangs his hat on me, since he's really the one in control. This comic was a particular favorite of Jay Kennedy, the author of the Underground and New Wave Comics Price Guide, and also of Lynn Hanson, who was a collector of our brand of comics back in the 1980s and 90s. This comic was first published in 1985 with a yellow cover, and it had 50 copies. The second edition came out in 1986, 30 copies with a salmon cover. The first edition had a yellow cover. You can see I really had big print runs back then. And I also really enjoyed this format, which we in those days called in a large digest. Network I operated in back then was the New Wave Network, with Clay Geardes and his Comics Wave and Comics World newsletters as the hub. I later republished this comic in the 90s as a print on demand. For a while, I had my own photocopiers. I kept burning them out. And when I reprinted those, they were reduced to letter size folded, which we called digest sized in those days. Then in 2005, this book was reprinted for the Danger Room, which is a comic shop. It still operates in Olympia, Washington. And Frank Hussey, who was the proprietor then and is today, asked me to make 5 copies of everything that I had. So I did. So every now and then you'll find a Danger Room edition on eBay or something, and they all have only 5 copy print runs. So those are really rare, and they really vary in the color of the covers. Then in 2011, with the help of Alan Fior and Blake Wirtz, I reprinted this book, and it was then that I discovered that legal size is not really carried anymore, and that the American Association of Archivists decided to get rid of legal size through Project ELF, Eliminate Legal Files. And so I could still get the guts of the comic in legal size, but not cardstock covers. So the cardstock cover of this one had to be specially cut, and I went to every single print shop in the Olympia, Washington area. Nobody carried it. So the main story in here is The Maze, and this was Jay Kennedy's favorite story, and he liked it so much that he reprinted it in giant size mini comics, I think number 3, and it's kind of a Tom is asking me to share information about Jay Kennedy and the Evergreen Mafia, as he called us. I attended school at the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington in the 1970s, and during that time period, Evergreen was a very experimental school. It had no academic departments, it had no grades, there were no tests, there were no fraternities, no sororities, there were no sports. It was a pretty wild place to be. I think Matt Groening once said every weirdo in the Pacific Northwest ended up there. He forgot the rest of the country who also showed up there. I mostly studied liberal arts while I was there, which was great because the only degree you could get in the 1970s was a BA in liberal arts. One of my fellow students there was Matt Groening, and I think the last time I looked in Wikipedia, they said he had a BA in journalism, but that is not true. He has a BA in liberal arts, just as somebody studying chemistry there would get a BA. And we all got a BA in liberal arts in the 70s. Although it is true that Matt did have ambitions of being a journalist, I believe, during those years. He was my neighbor and my friend, and I worked with him on the Cooper Point Journal. Other cartoonists who were there when I attended were Linda Barry and Charles Burns. I knew Linda pretty well at the time. But we all kind of centered around Matt because he was the editor of the school paper, and he managed to rope us into the comics page, which he began with the paper, the Cooper Point Journal. Years later, Jay Kennedy, who was kind of a freelance cartoon agent at the time, later he went to King Features, he called me up right when I was graduating from my master's program in librarianship at the University of Washington, which was not the most fun time. And I had gotten married right after I graduated, so I was about to begin this career for something I had to toil and work for to get the piece of paper to go into. He called me up and said, "We would like to consider you for Esquire magazine. They're going to do cartoon, 3 monthly pages. One will be on politics, one will be on social issues, and one will be on gender identities. We would like you to be considered. We're going to take 12 names and we're going to submit them to the publishers. And would you agree? And I couldn't believe he asked me. I was just flabbergasted. That was never my intention. But I said yes. So I was just kind of interested in what would happen next. So the next thing I know, he calls me up a little later and he says, "You're one of the 3." I was like, I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. I'd never studied art. This was not my intention, not my aim. I said, "Oh, that's great. Who are the other 2 people?" He said, "Linda Barry and Matt Groening." And I informed him we were all friends in college, and he did not know that. So then he formed the term Evergreen Mafia, which was not really true. We weren't that thick then as leaves. Then as we continued on submitting work, the publishers said, "Well, we have 2 problems with your work. Number 1, the drawing, and number 2, the writing." So I don't know what's left after that. They also had a problem with Matt and I both using funny animal characters. I had Morty the dog right here, this fellow, and Matt may have had Binky Bunny at that time, but he had some funny animal. And so I think at that point, Matt and I both said, forget it, we bailed. And Linda continued on, and she was published in it. And later she said, "I did it because I only had $10 in the bank at the time." So who can blame her? So that's the Evergreen Jay Kennedy connection. And Jay continued to try to get me to submit to other magazines like Atlantic Monthly and Lears. But at that point, I was already well on my way in my other day job career, and I just instantly said no. I was very interested in starting a family and a career in something else. And I was just cartooned on the side, just for my own enjoyment. My audience were mostly other cartoonists in the New Wave network. So that was really a fun time. I do admit that I enjoyed cartooning way more than my day job. No question. So that's the Jay Kennedy connection, and this was his favorite of all my stories, as far as I know. Basically, Morty takes a metaphorical journey, and it kind of says where I was in this time of life, trying to figure it all out, living a day at a time, trying to have fun in a world that had gone insane. This was during Reagan's first term, who I think really kind of started us on the road that we currently enjoy. I think that first term is really when the mess we're in today really started, and comics have helped me survive all these years. I'm still waiting for grown-ups to wind up being in charge of our government. I really have a problem with people who are mindless followers of mass movements, whether they're left wing or right wing, it doesn't matter. I really value critical thinking and independent thinking, and I think that's where Morty comes in. And in this story, that's very, very evident. I mean, it's a very sharp Morty story. I can see why Jay would have preferred this. This panel right here on the top of page 11, that image has been used over and over by other people. And this image of Morty smashing through the glass has also been used a lot. But this image on the top, I can't really place why, but it is. And at the end, Morty is playing a saxophone, and there's a quote from John Milton. Morty and the saxophone, that seems to be his instrument. In fact, in the comic I just finished, Cranium Frenzy number 49, Morty, starts and ends with Morty playing a saxophone. So that's not something new. It's been going on for 40 years. Morty playing a saxophone. Here's Chow Time. This is just a short bit, and it's not really one of my better strips, I will confess. I can see I'm doing something kind of interesting here with the panels, but not a strip I'm really happy about. The true, actual, authentic, I'm not kidding around, death of Morty. I did try to kill Morty the dog off several times, and this was yet another time. Here you see him standing in line. Here's Dick Dogface, character by Bruce Crislip, and here's Dog Boy, character by Steve Laffler, and I was giving a nod to them, my other dog cartoon creator friends. They're both great cartoonists. This comic was inspired by my friend Bob Richard. Here we see this panel right here was done with a soldering gun that I think I burned into the paper, and then I put black behind it. Why I did that? I think I just had it, and I did it because I could. So this sport of dog butting, according to my friend Bob Richard, who is a fellow librarian and now is an artist in Tacoma and a writer, Bob told me about this medieval sport called dog butting, where they would tie a dog up, as you see here, and people would run at it and hit it with their craniums as hard as they could. And that was the sport. That's what they did for fun. And that's why this character is called Bob Richard Orlovsky, because I was kind of giving a nod to the fact that Bob was the one who gave me the idea for the strip. So they do it to Morty the dog. As Morty is about to die, it's coming real close. And then I switch switch to another story, and I'm going to introduce a new character, a happy character. He's cute and fuzzy, and he travels through space, and he wears pants and doesn't use offensive language, and he knows the difference between good and evil. And that character is Cosmo Bear. Here he is. Bye, Cosmo. May God be with you. He's cute. He's fuzzy. He travels through space. Good luck, kid. Bye. See you later, folks. I'm taking off on a new adventure. And there he is, and he takes off, and he meets evil Mr. Time. I was going to start this whole new character and get rid of that miserable cur. Then he plows and goes through time, and he lands in Elizabethan England, where they blind him, and then they put him in a bear baiting pit. Vicious dog's heading for him, and he says, "Oh boy, I may be blind, but I can hear my little animal friends coming." As I was drawing that page, I was laughing so hard, I had to stop drawing, and my wife took a picture of me laughing so hard I was wiping tears from my face. And that's the kind of dark humor I liked in 1986, because my job probably was so miserable. And so he meets a little dog, and he gives him a tablet to put in his ear, and then eventually Morty uses the tablet to save him. Oh, and here the evil guy, Bob Richarolowski, says, "And then Morty the dog will be gone forever, and then I will smile for several continuous minutes." I was trying to invent new characters, and they just kept dying before Morty. And at the very end of the comic, Morty flies away. And I did end a lot of comics like this, where the panels would go on, and Morty would kind of disappear in perspective into the distance until he was like a tiny silhouette or a little dot. That was a convention that I somehow used a lot during that era, probably mimicking the film noir films or westerns that I enjoyed, because I'm a big movie buff. So there you have it. The 28 pages of Dog of Dawn, Dog of Dusk. And thank you, Tom, for allowing me to show people this comic.